I made this tabletop bar because I don't have space for a cart or full-size bar, and I wanted something portable where I could take drink mixing tools, a bucket of ice, and different mixers and just bring it all to one location where I can make a couple different kinds of drinks. Now, I really had no plan, but I had a frame in mind. I wanted to make a tusk tenon type of frame. I'm starting off by cutting a 12-inch piece from 8/4 cherry. This is going to be for the legs, and I cut this in multiple passes just to help prevent binding. Next, I rip 4 pieces out of that chunk at 1 3/4 inches. I then mark the top direction just to help me with planing, because I'm going to be using the planer here just to get all of these in even thickness and just nice and square dimensions. Next, I cut out a 13-inch block for spacers, which is what I'm calling the stretchers that connect the legs going front to back. I'm making all the spacers, and later on the stretchers too, all 1 1/4 inches square. These have to be thinner than the legs to get the tusk tenon joinery to work properly, although 1 1/4 was kind of arbitrary. It's what I thought looked best. But speaking with stretchers, I cut out a 29-inch block for those. And again, the spacers are the ones going front and back, and the stretchers here are going side to side. Here's a quick overview of how the pieces will connect together, although the spacers will be regular mortise and tenon, and the stretchers will be tusk tenon. This required a whole lot of planning though, just marking out exactly where I needed to hog out material. Almost all of the mortising is done on the legs, and what I start with first is drilling out for the tusk tenons, which has to go all the way through the legs. I follow up by drilling out holes for the regular tenons where the spacers connect, and these are only drilled part way through. Moving on to cutting the tenons, I'm starting with the spacers, cutting these out on the table saw, and then I moved on to prepping for chisel work. I'm marking out squares on all the holes so I know where to line up the chisel. I don't have a special corner chisel, so I drilled out the corners with a really thin bit just to help as I'm chiseling out the squares. Moving on to the stretchers, I'm drilling out a smaller hole for the tusk mortise. This is where it gets more complicated with the tusk tenon joinery. I'm doing the mortising first before cutting out the tenon for stability reasons. So once that was done, I could move over and cut out all the tenons with the table saw, just like I did for the spacers. Moving back to the leg, I had to square out the mortises for the stretchers, and this time the tenon goes all the way through because eventually a wedge will hold that in place. For the wedges, I'm just using maple, and I had to plane it to the right thickness, and then cut out the wedges, which mine were only at a 3-degree angle. That's up to you though. And lastly, before assembling everything, I added a chamfer to everything, all of the legs, spacers, and stretchers, and then sanded everything. Moving on to assembly, the tusk tenon joints technically don't need to be glued in place, but I added glue just because I'm not planning on taking this apart, so I figured it couldn't hurt. But here's the general idea. The wedge here gets popped in place, and you hammer it in or push it in, and it holds everything together really well without technically needing any glue. I assembled the front and back first because the tusk tenons kind of clamp everything together themselves, so I figured it was a lot easier to do that and then glue and clamp together the 2 pieces with the spacers in between. After the glue was dry, I added a last second detail here, just cutting the corners with my knife just because I thought it would be a neat look. But after that, I moved on to the top, and I changed my mind a whole bunch of times on this, but I started off by cutting a bunch of maple boards to the length of the frame in between the legs, and I milled all that up and then moved over to just a basic panel glue up. But a mistake I made here was waiting too long and the glue cured, so instead of a scraper I had to clean everything up with a hand plane, which obviously was a lot more work than the regular scraper. After glue cleanup, I moved on to sanding, using these really nice inline dog hole clamps that I made in a previous video. I moved to test the fit, and I was all proud of myself, but I really didn't like it, so I changed the design because I thought it would be cool to have the bottles on the side and the top could be sort of a waterfall type of look. So to do that, I had to cut the top at 45 degrees in a couple different passes to get a continuous grain, and for glue up I used some tape and also a framing square just to get everything lined up nicely because I wanted a nice square miter glue up. With the top figured out, I'm moving on to making a drawer, which I'm using a more traditional method instead of my simplistic method, and I'm using cherry for the sides rather than plywood because I want it to kind of hide behind the frame. I'm cutting a groove in the two side pieces, and then I follow up by cutting a tenon in the front and back pieces. I tested the fit of all the pieces, and the trick here is getting a snug fit so all the pieces hold together by themselves without glue or clamps. And when I was happy with that, I added a groove to all the pieces for the plywood to fit. And then I moved on to assembly. Because I'm using side mount drawer slides, I had to add these guides in place. I just glued them, but it's long grain to long grain, so that should be fine. And for the drawer face, I found this scrap that was wide enough to actually use as the drawer face without a glue up. For the drawer face, I'm adding a handle, so I'm using this handy little guide from Milescraft, but there's a lot of different options from different brands just for helping line up holes for drawer handles. I'm using Z-clips to attach the top, so kind of a last minute thing I had to do is use my biscuit joiner to cut out the slots. Now to test the fit of everything so far, I installed the drawer and then plopped on the top just to see how I like the look of everything so far. And then I figured out what to do down below, which I was thinking just a small simple shelf. So all I did is glue up a bunch of boards, cut them to size, added a chamfer, everything that I've already done in this video, so I just wanted to speed up the process, and you can see here, that's what it looks like with the small shelf added.